Welcome to the Patchwork Podcast. My name is Brandon Robertson. Patchwork is a show that brings together various voices and perspectives on the topics of spirituality, social justice, and culture to help you expand your mind and tap into a richer, fuller life. To start, let me introduce myself. I'm Brandon, and for as long as I can remember, I've had a passion for bringing together diverse people and perspectives. My journey began as a teenager who joined a conservative Baptist church and at the same time began wrestling with my own queer sexuality. The tension of these two important aspects of my identity, my faith and my sexuality, led me down a path of curiosity and questioning in just about every aspect of my life. Today, I'm an author, a pastor, and a consultant to faith communities and organizations around the world about how we can build bridges and understand those who experience the world differently than we do. And this podcast is an extension of that passion and that work. In every episode, we'll dive deep into a new topic with an expert in that field and see if we can get a better understanding. You might agree with what's said. You might disagree. Whatever the case, I invite you to lean in and listen deeply, because I assure you that you'll find something worth grabbing onto in every conversation that will enrich your journey. As with all things done in public, your support means the world to me. So if you find today's content compelling, please tweet, post, like, share on all the social media platforms using the hashtag Patchwork. And your feedback really does make every episode better. So if you have time, please consider heading over to iTunes and leaving a review. Again, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's jump into today's conversation. Well, welcome to the Patchwork Podcast. It's Brandon here, and I'm so glad that you've joined us again for another episode where we're going to be cultivating another really important and interesting conversation at the intersection of, this time, Christian spirituality, Eastern spirituality, and climate change. You know, one of the biggest issues facing my generation, the millennials, and subsequent generations beneath us is the reality that we're approaching the point of no return. I think the numbers are something like by 2021 or 22, if we haven't reduced carbon emissions and achieved a number of these climate goals, that we're going to see the effects of global climate change impact our planet in a way that we can't reverse. This is going to be something that we all face. This is a pending challenge that is not just something far off in the realm of science fiction or something that generations, hundreds of years from now, are going to have to deal with. This is an ever-present and growing danger. And I think more and more I'm grateful that there is an awakening in politicians, an awakening in pop culture, an awakening in society in general to the reality of climate change, to how urgent this matter is, to what the effects of climate change will be on us, the effects on third world countries and countries that are less developed is going to be catastrophic. But unfortunately, as we know often in our culture, unless it impacts us, we don't turn our gaze to it. But hearing what climate change would do to the United States, wiping out coastal cities in significant ways like Miami and eventually Washington, D.C. and New York, Los Angeles, where I'm at, San Diego, San Francisco, these coastal cities, when sea levels rise, are going to literally be destroyed, be sunk underwater. For so many of us, that's hard to imagine. But this is the result of our bad stewardship of our planet. This is a result of us not taking seriously that what we produce and how we utilize natural resources and how we interact with the natural world actually impacts the world in tangible ways that will eventually come back to bite us, but also bite every other species on our planet. Climate change is a big issue. It's something we all need to be thinking about and all need to be talking about. And as somebody who's part of a religious tradition that has far too often ignored and perpetuated climate conspiracy, denial, an entitlement that says we are God's, the height of God's creation, and therefore we can do whatever we want to the planet. This domination mindset that has been perpetuated by the Christian tradition, I think, has a lot of responsibility for global climate change. And I'm so grateful that in liberal Protestant circles, in Orthodox circles, in Roman Catholic circles, we're beginning to shift the narrative and message and theology around how people of faith should think about climate change and how we relate to the natural and created world. But we have 2,000 years of perpetuating bad theology in the mainstream and demotivating people from actually caring about our planet and caring about our world. And so today's conversation is one that I think is really important. I'm really excited to bring to you. I'm getting to talk with one of the most influential spiritual thinkers and activists in the world today, Matthew Fox. Matthew Fox holds a doctorate in history and theology of spiritualities from the Institut Catholique de Paris, and is the author of 35 books on spirituality and culture that have been translated into 69 languages. He's also received many awards for his work on specifically creation spirituality, helping those of us in the Western modernistic world to reconnect with indigenous ways of seeing and being in the world. And as we reconnect to those indigenous ways of seeing and being in the world, which are rooted in the created world, we'll also begin to care for our planet more, because one of Matthew's greatest I don't want to say innovations, but one of the ways that he's really helped a new generation think about spirituality is he's helped us move God from being the God who's out there to the God who is ever present in and through all things. And if God is ever present in nature, if God is ever present in animals, if God is ever present in people, even those we disagree with, that changes things. Because if we can begin to see and seek and search for God in the midst of everything and everyone, then we'll begin, I hope, to walk with a new kind of reverence, a new kind of respect, a new kind of awe for our planet, for our cosmos, and for our world. So I'm really excited to bring this conversation to you with the world-renowned spirituality writer, teacher, activist, Matthew Fox. Well, thank you so much for taking time to join me this morning as we talk about a very important conversation, I think one of the most vital conversations in spirituality, but in broader culture right now. And that's the relation of humanity to the cosmos, to the created world. And you've been kind of the leading voice over the past couple decades on this conversation, really paving a way forward for those of us who have some spiritual grounding and are interested in indigenous ways of seeing and being the world, to reconnect with nature and then turn that into something that actually is transformative in society and culture for the good of our planet. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you ended up in this space and interested in this conversation.
Well, thanks for your good question and for having me on your show. I'm glad you have a show like this, Brandon. Yeah, in the 60s, I went to get my doctorate in spirituality in Paris at the Institut Catholique there. It was Thomas Merton, the Catholic monk, who advised me to go to Paris. And there I met my mentor, Père Chanou. He was a 75-year-old French Dominican. And he showed me that there is this creation spiritual tradition in the West that has often been neglected. Instead, we have this fall redemption story about religion, that it's all about sin and original sin and getting out of that and all that. But no, creation spirituality begins with, well, the original fireball 13.8 billion years ago. And I think to begin with, sin is so anthropocentric, only human sin. So, to begin with, sin leaves out 13.8 billion years of the universe and of God's works. So how stupid is that? And that's how you get in trouble like this, because we don't we've not been instructed really to see the world as sacred,
Mm.
to see the world as the presence and the work of the divine that has in fact brought our species along, but it's been a 13.8 billion year journey. And then prophets like Thomas Berry say that ecology is functional cosmology. So if we're in an ecological crisis, we certainly are, and this is the number one moral issue of our time, certainly of your generation. I love this movement now going on in England called Extinction Rebellion. I don't know if you've heard much about it.
No.
Go online. It's they're really, it's really happening, and the people behind it are very committed to nonviolence and so forth. But they're really smart, and they're drawing not just a lot of young people, but older people too. We all should be worried about this, not just for ourselves, but our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, etc. And the future of the planet is really up for grabs, as everyone knows who isn't in denial. So spirituality it is about living life at a deeper level, not just a surface level of things. St. Paul talks about the inner person, distinct from the outer person. So does Meister Eckhart, my favorite mystic. And so there's this inner work that has to go on. And this has to do with falling in love with life, falling in love with creation, in spite of history, and then acting on that and preserving the beauty, the health, and the sacredness of creation as much as we can for future generations. Mm. So this is a tradition I've been working on for 45 years, creation spirituality, trying to bring that alive. I've had a lot of opposition. People at first said, oh, he's a tree worshiper and all this stuff. He's a pagan and a tree worshiper and a pantheist. And but it's interesting. 2 popes condemned me over 34 years and called my work, quote, dangerous and deviant, unquote. Now, this Pope Francis, in his encyclical Laudate Si on caring for the environment, our common home, as you call it, he's really plagiarized my work, because that encyclical was actually written by one of my students, and 80% of it was. So I've lived a long enough life, to see the whole circle here of both condemnation and now movement. So, yeah, that in a nutshell is what I've been about. And I got expelled from the Dominican order after 34 years because of my standing up to those popes who were not only anthropocentric and utterly committed to original sin. I wrote a book called The Original Blessing, and it kind of freaked them out in the Vatican at the time. But also they were highly sexist, and they took after liberation theology, and I was very, what should I say, in communion with liberation theology too. And I see the liberation of the earth, if you will, from human attitudes of superiority and narcissism, a good word that Pope Francis uses, or the narcissism of our species. I saw that as a real important issue in our time. So I think your generation, you're inheriting all this mess. You're the ones, as Mayor Pete says, who are going to have to pay it off. This is your business. So I just want to support you as an elder and let you know that there is a lineage. There is a lineage, and I've been naming these people, including Jesus, who was a peasant and was so grounded in nature, comes through in all his stories, his parables, and but a lineage, including Hildegard of Bingen in the 12th century, Thomas Aquinas in the 13th, and Meister Eckhart, perhaps the greatest of the mystics of the West, in the late 13th century, Hildegard of Bingen, Julian of Norwich, Nicholas Acusa. David Bohm, the physicist, says, I owe more to Nicholas Acusa, a 15th century mystic, than I do to Einstein, he said, which is quite stunning. So anyway, there is this great tradition. And then in our time, in the 20th century and 21st century, you have other people like Thomas Merton and Dorothy Day and Thomas Berry and Dorothy Sola and all kinds of feminists and earth activists who are trying to put this kind of thinking into practice again, the sacredness of the earth. Yeah. We're part of it.
Wow. Yeah, and it strikes me that you talked about how this anthropocentric, I'm not going to get the word right,
Anthropocentric. Yeah,
yes, that. Uh,
mouthful.
so this focus on humans being the pinnacle of God's creation, it's kind of, I think we could say fairly that it's a fairly Judeo-Christian innovation. And it seems to me that Christianity is kind of on the hook in some way for perpetuating a mindset among the billions of people that belong to it, that humans are the pinnacle of God's creation. The earth is disposable, and we can just use it as we need. Can you talk about how you've already referenced it a bit, but how Christianity has kind of made this climate change a problem as bad as it is?
Yes, well, again, it's that tradition in Christianity, the fall redemption tradition, represented by Augustine and many, most others, that preaches that. But the creation tradition does not. For example, Thomas Aquinas said, and I quote, "The most excellent thing in the universe is not the human. The most excellent thing in the universe, is the universe itself." That kind of puts us back in context. And he says, Revelation comes in 2 volumes. Nature and the Bible. And you see so much Christianity, especially in the modern era, and that would mean Protestantism, has put all of Revelation into a book.
Yeah.
The book called the Bible, not the book called nature.
Yeah.
But that leaves so much out. And so again, these pre-modern thinkers, that's why I love Eckhart and Hildegard and Aquinas, because they think like indigenous people do. For them, you begin with the universe, you begin with the cosmos. You know, when the university was invented in the 12th century, it meant a place to go to find your place in the universe. It was about cosmology. It was about how do we fit in and so forth. Then in the modern era, it became very patriarchal and very anthropocentric, and it became a place to go to find your place in a man-made work world. And good luck at that. So you can just see the shrinking of the soul here from the pre-modern consciousness, which, as you pointed out, indigenous people carry, which is about our place in the universe, not about us being at the pinnacle of things. But once you set up nature and say, oh, it's all fallen and so forth, which is what Augustine did, and when you don't care about science, which is what fundamentalists, not only today, but they did in the Middle Ages too. They attacked Aquinas because Aquinas took the best scientist of his day, Aristotle, who came through Islam in the time. So Aristotle had 3 strikes against him. He was a pagan, he came through Islam, and he was a scientist. And Aquinas ran his whole life with him and was very controversial. He was condemned 3 times by the bishops before they canonized him a saint. So obviously he was doing something interesting, and he was. He knew what he was doing. He was bringing science into Christianity. He said a mistake about creation results in a mistake about God. So that just underscores the importance of science, because science tells us about creation. You know, just one of the contemporary issues is blowing up all the churches is about homosexuality. The truth is, science has spoken on homosexuality. In the 1970s, it was settled that there's going to be a certain minority, 6 to 8% in any human population going to be gay, so get over it. But all these people clinging to their Bibles, which, you know, were last printed 2,000 years ago, you know, shutting their eyes and ears off to science, once again, just like they did with Galileo in the 16th century, 17th century. You know, it's just creating all this havoc, which is a total waste of energy, because we should be working together to save the planet. And instead, we're going around dumping homophobia on people. So that's just one example of how right Aquinas was. A mistake about creation was also a mistake about God. God is not homophobic.
I was on an email thread with you a month ago for Progressive Christianity, and you said this very compelling line that was, perhaps we should set aside the Bible for a little while and try to get the revelation through nature. Like maybe that would be more helpful to our collective spiritual pursuits as a Western culture than keep going back to the Bible and trying to root ourselves in the Bible. And
Thomas Berry said that about 20 years ago or so. He said we should put the Bible on the shelf for 15 years
Mm.
because it creates so much cacophony and so forth. And right, we should put ourselves more in the presence of nature, which also means science. And it's not that there aren't a lot of deep, wise teachings in the Bible, as they are in all the scriptures of the world, but the Bible can become an idolatrous thing. Yeah, there is such a thing as Bibleolatry. Anything humans engage in can become an idol.
Totally.
And as a medieval said, corruption of the best is the worst.
Mm.
So, I think there's a real danger in overvaluing the Bible. I think there's a danger in overvaluing the left brain. I think we need intuition, we need creativity, we need spontaneity, we need play to be human and to be on a path of truth.
Mm. Yeah. And it seems to me that modernism and postmodernity hasn't been kind to the Western Christian tradition in the sense that my generation has, by and large, left the institution of the church, continues to leave the institution of religion in general. And there is this natural pull back towards these indigenous ways of seeing and being in the world, because precisely something you talk about often, in the modern world, spirituality became a discipline of the head. It became completely this modernistic way of knowing God through knowledge, through study. And we completely lost the embodied presence of God and seeing God in and through all things and all people. And it's been interesting as an LGBT Christian. I've been watching our movement over the past couple years, and so many of us I've seen actually have been drawn back into, whether it's Celtic pagan traditions mixing with our Christianity or African indigenous traditions mixing with Christianity. There's this pull back to this ancient knowledge that I find so compelling. And as you said, it's also super helpful to us in this creation crisis that we're in, because it draws us back into the created world. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about beyond what is drawing people out of the institution of the church and deeper into this kind of embodied spirituality?
Well, of course, part of it is the shadow in the churches, the corruption, the hypocrisy. Of course, the pedophile priest thing is, and the cover up, which is even worse, is a big part of that in Catholicism. But even in the evangelicals and others, you have all kinds of issues of aligning themselves with dictators or wannabe dictators and with right-wing so-called values and all the rest. It's really stunning. So I think just the stench of bad religion drives thinking people and idealistic young people out, to look for alternatives. Also, the ignorance of our own mystical tradition. Seminaries have not been teaching the mystics. I mean, I don't have time to go into stories, but I know all kinds of stories about seminaries like Yale Divinity School 20 years ago when I went there to lecture. The faculty didn't show up and the students were all excited. It was a workshop a week. And afterwards, the students said to me, well, the faculty didn't come because they said mysticism is a fad. I said, oh, really? So on the plane home, I wrote an article called, Is Yale Divinity School a Fad? And I pointed out that long before the bricks of Yale were laid, there were mystics. And long after those bricks turn to dust, if there's still a planet and human race, there will be mystics. So mysticism is much bigger than Yale Divinity School or any academic pursuit you see. It's about the human heart in connecting to our oneness with the universe and our oneness with one another. And so, I think that so much of Christianity has missed the boat. Again, I think Augustine took us on a direct detour when he invented original sin, which is utterly un-Jewish. Jesus never heard of original sin. No Jews ever heard of original sin. And here's a church building itself up on original sin. It's really strange in the name of Jesus.
Wow.
So, like Eli Wiesel says, original sin is alien to Jewish thinking. So not only is it not in the Bible, it's alien. It introduces a view of the world that Jesus would not recognize for a second. And that has held dominance. And of course, the reason it has, Augustine was 4th century, the century the church inherited the empire. So original sin works great if you're going to run an empire. But so that whole alliance with empires is, of course, the big the big anchor around Christianity's neck. And this is why liberation theology was so revelatory and so wonderful, because it consciously broke with the Western Empire. And of course, it brought down, as a result, it brought down a lot of darkness against it, like the Ronald Reagan's National Security Council put out a document 3 months after he was made president, after he took the oath of presidency. How can we destroy liberation theology in Latin America? They concluded they can't destroy it, but they could split the church. So they went to Rome with satchels. The head of CIA, who was a right-wing Opus Dei Catholic, took 29 trips to Rome with briefcases full of cash to give to Pope John Paul II, to give to Solidarity in exchange for John Paul II going after liberation theology in Latin America. So that the church was really split on that, since 1970s. And and then now this Pope Francis, of course, he is much more partial to liberation theology. He comes from Latin America, and he canonized Archbishop Romero, who in fact was not only murdered by the military in El Salvador, assassinated, but also Vatican hated him. They kept trying to shut him up and so forth. So, there's just all this this confusion. So I think a lot of people have found, I myself have found great benefit with Native American rituals. Baco Storsa, the Lakota teacher, came to my program years ago. He said he'd had dreams for 10 years. He should work with white people because they're running things and they aren't very smart. And he said he didn't want to, but after 10 years, his dreams were destroying him. So he read about my work, Creation Spirituality, and he drove across country with his wife and showed up one day at my school in Oakland and said, here I'm to help you. So he had sweat lodges on campus for faculty, staff, students, and all this. I went and did a vision quest with him. Then he started his own center up in the state of Washington. But a wonderful man, and I learned so much from all those ceremonies. And they get you, as you say, into your body, into the earth, out of your reading of books, which we seem to think is the only way to pray or something in the West since the modern era. So I have great respect for and gratitude to the indigenous traditions. But all the traditions have something to offer. Buddhism has so much to offer, and Hinduism too. They have such a cosmic sense. And of course, the goddess traditions. And I wrote about this in my book, One River, Many Wells, that I tried to bring together all the world's spiritual traditions around like 18 themes that we can all agree on, like the sacredness of creation, like meditation, calming that reptilian brain, like our views about life, what happens after this life, and of course the work of spiritual warriorhood and of compassion. We all agree on compassion. Why don't we just get together, what these things that are so basic, and run with them and quit trying to compete with one another, rather borrow from one another's strategies and practices that can make us human again.
Yeah, totally. And in that same vein, you've contributed to this new book, The Lotus and the Rose, and it's the bringing together of Tibetan Buddhism and mystical Christianity. It seems to me that in this day and age, the way I formulated my own version of what's happening in our modern world is I think that the Spirit of God is at work in deconstructing this Western patriarchal society that's dominated the world for so long. And we see the shift to the global South and to the East. Power in religion is moving in that direction. Power in economics and all sorts of other ways are moving in different spheres of the world that haven't traditionally held the opportunity to influence the rest of the world. I wonder, as the East kind of becomes a more dominant leader on the world stage, how Eastern spirituality and Eastern ways of thinking about the world and reality and life are going to impact the Western world. I wonder if you can give a little insight into that.
Well, I had a dream once. I was doing a workshop in Santa Monica, and they put me up in a Buddhist home. And I was all alone there, but in the morning, they warned me a group might come in and chant. Well, I said, fine. So sure enough, a group came in about 5 a.m. and chanted beautiful. So I woke up to this beautiful Buddhist chanting. Then they left and went back to sleep, and I had a dream about Buddha and Jesus. And what it taught me was this. Buddha, lived to be about 84. So he had seen all of life. He had been married, was a father, a beggar, a pilgrim, and a teacher, and all the rest. And he died serenely, surrounded by his disciples at about the age of 84. Jesus got himself murdered at 30. So you have two different stories there that are very interesting. So I talk about the holy patience of the Buddha. We all need that. Every human being needs that, serenity and patience. But we also need the holy impatience of Jesus, who was a Jewish prophet who stood up to the empire of his day and paid the price. And that's what I learned. The East has a lot to teach the West, but the West has things to teach the East. And, Gandhi said, I learned to say no from the West. That is from Jesus. And of course, Gandhi met Jesus through Tolstoy. And Gandhi took the Gospels much more seriously than most Christians have. And he developed the method of nonviolence, which was based on Jesus' teachings. And he was never a Christian. He was a Hindu to the end, when he was murdered by a Hindu, a fundamentalist Hindu. Little warning there about the dangers of religion. Yeah. Here he took on the British Empire and lived, and then he was killed by one of his own. So so I think it's important to realize that now in this book that I did is dialogues with Lama Soma. Lama Soma is a Tibetan Buddhist Lama. It's kind of like being a bishop, I'm told. And she's an American, actually, and a Jewish person. But she's fluent in Tibetan, and she's really serious practitioner and all the rest. But when she says she goes to Taiwan, she's kind of become famous on TV because she's telling young people in Taiwan to learn Buddhism because there's so much there. Whereas the young people in Asia, a lot of them are looking west even for religion. Many of them are very curious about Jesus, for example. Not about Christianity so much, but about Jesus. So it's really an interesting thing. It's like trains, passing each other in the night. But I think there's a reason for this. I think in the East, they can be too lackadaisical about reincarnation. Oh, well, if things don't go well this time around, next time around, go better. And this is why Gandhi said, I had to learn no from the West. That is that prophetic, Jewish prophetic idea, saying no to injustice. That means that, no, it's not just about reincarnation, about next time, it's about bringing justice this time around. So I think there's a lot to be learned both ways. And that's what Lama Soma and I do in that book, because these were public dialogues we had in several places around the country, where we talk about each other's traditions. And she didn't know, a lot of people don't know, including Christians, that we have a Meister Eckhart who was very, very Buddhist without having read any Buddhism. But he found many of Buddhist truths through his own deep contemplative and active work as a Dominican Christian. So it's about mysticism itself as a common language, even a common religion, if you will, that's deeper than our external expressions of religion. And what you said earlier, I really resonate with, because when I was like 23 years old, I said to my Dominican superiors, my generation is going to be less interested in religion, but more interested in spirituality. And you don't have anyone here getting with a doctorate in spirituality, so send someone, and I'm glad to volunteer. So that's how my little trip went. But very early, that was in the early 60s, I realized that spirituality was the future, not religion, because religion is form, it's structure. And it has to die at times and be reborn. But as Jung said, only the mystic brings what is creative to religion itself. So that's how you reinvent religion, is through spirituality, mysticism, experience. The experience both of the contemplative side, but also the prophetic side, the warrior side, the battles that we wage in the name of justice. That's how you renew a religion.
I love that so much. And as kind of a way to land the plane here, I think I'm talking to you as a young pastor of a church here in San Diego, a progressive, open church, and yet we're still trapped in a lot of forms. Our church feels very evangelical, for instance, so we do all the things that evangelical churches do, preaching and worship bands and all of that good stuff. And I don't think that these churches are going to go away in America anytime in the next couple decades, by and large, I think. Are there ways that institutions that exist like my church can begin to embrace and lead people towards creation spirituality, towards a spirituality that embodies and connects people to the broader presence of God in other traditions and in other places in the world?
Well, one thing I've been working on since becoming Episcopalian, because when the Pope fired me, I became Episcopalian about 25 years ago, to work with young people to reinvent forms of worship, reinvent the liturgy. And so we borrowed a lot of things from rave. So we dance instead of sitting in pews and daring the preacher to keep us awake. And we use DJs and VJs and rap and so forth, these postmodern art forms, to pray in that context. In fact, we're doing a Cosmic Mass this weekend, Sunday, in San Antonio. We did one in the World Parliament of Religions in Toronto in November, and then this invitation was born of that. But I think it's very important that to realize that we could be more flexible and spontaneous and creative about forms of worship, and it's not about throwing out all the other forms. It's just about introducing this too. And maybe you don't want to do it on a Sunday morning because that would rattle too many cages. So do it on another day of the week or a Sunday night or something. But we've done over 100 of these masses in North America, and they've been very powerful and very ecumenical. All kinds of people show up because everyone's hungry for ritual. Why do 65,000 people go out to the desert every August for Burning Man? Because there's a hunger in the human soul for ritual. As Melody Somi says, there's no community without ritual. So, but I think we have to get our eyes out of the books when we pray. And dancing is an ancient way to pray. And it's the way the indigenous people do it all over the world and have always done it. And getting what I talk about, awakening all the chakras. You see, if you're just reading, you're probably praying for the neck up. But to dance is to awaken the first chakra. And then the others can be fed too. So take a look at, there's a webpage we have, cosmicmass.org. And it would be part of my MatthewFox.org website. But learn more about the Cosmic Mass. And if anyone's listening and you're available Sunday, come to San Antonio. Because there's a power here in this new language of your generation and the younger generation that should be put to sacred use. We should be worshiping using these art forms and not just stuck in modern forms of worship like reading and preaching and even singing. Singing is good in itself, but it's not the only way to ignite the fire that is the Holy Spirit and that is the Kundalini in our bodies that wants to express itself through all 7 chakras, not just through the head ones.
I love that. It just reminds me, so often I've, since coming out as an LGBT person, going into gay clubs, seeing people have what feel like genuine spiritual experiences there as this place of sacred safety, but also where they fully get to embody and express themselves. I love how that mirrors exactly kind of what you just described. Definitely.
And a sense of community that we all need as human beings. And it's quite lacking in our culture, that's why people are so lonely.
Totally.
And, there are many ways to do church or post-church or unchurch.
Totally.
But our ancestors weren't stupid, and they tried to create spaces. I mean, think of the buzz around the burning down of Notre Dame Cathedral. I wrote an article on that, and the 12th century Gothic, it was a revolution in architecture, the Gothic thing, and it was very feminine because it brought in light. It was opposed to the Romanesque architecture. It was so squat with little tiny windows and with thick walls and all this, whereas the Gothic was so welcoming of all. And that century, by the way, the 12th century that birthed the birth of the university, the return of the goddess, the Green Man, and the Gothic Revolution. Also, there was no homophobia for 100 years. They were actually teaching in the original stages of the University of Paris. They were teaching gay love literature as well as heterosexual love literature. In fact, the bishop who built Chartres Cathedral, which is the greatest, most wonderful of all these inventions of the 12th century, he himself was gay. And so that's interesting too, that this burst of creativity. My mentor, Parishanu, said that the 12th century Renaissance was the only Renaissance that worked in the West, because it was not top down like the 16th century Renaissance. It was bottom up. It was the poor, it was the serfs, the freed young people from the serfhood, and women who really gave birth to the 12th century Renaissance. And great things happened. And that's what we need today, is a Renaissance like that.
Totally. Yeah, it was hard not to see Notre Dame, as tragic as that was, as a symbol for us to reflect on about what's happening in our worlds, both spiritually and politically and everything in between.
Exactly. The burning down of the feminine, of the divine feminine.
Totally.
And this is where gay people have a tremendous gift to give too, because gays and lesbians are not stuck in one frozen version of gender or of seeing the world. And this is why, indigenous people have taught me for years that in their tradition, all the spiritual directors of the great chiefs were gay, because they knew that gay people were more spiritual than straight people. And, then Christianity comes in with its stupidity and homophobia and turns it all around. But the truth is I've researched that in other traditions in Africa, in the Celtic traditions too. This is true. Yet it's been covered up again by bad religion since. But it's just that, so to be homophobic is to shoot yourself in the foot in terms of spiritual energy and possibilities. So that just, that won't do. And that's why this struggle of gay liberation, and young people like yourself facing it early, this is a very important sign of hope, really, in our time. But again, it's not easy.
Yeah, totally. And
it's with it, energy.
Yeah, totally. But I really do want to say I appreciate the work that you've done in all of these areas to help pave the way so that these movements, both on creation spirituality, but on liberation fronts all across the Christian theological spectrum, it's been so helpful and informative in my own journey, and I know to so many others. So thank you for your tireless work.
And thank you for the work you're doing, this program, but your work in ministry too. That's really wonderful.
I hope that you found today's conversation inspiring and challenging. It's through listening in and learning from others who see the world differently than us, which, by the way, means everyone, because no two people have the same vantage point. That's how we grow and expand. If you did enjoy today's podcast, please share it with your friends on social media and help to spread the word. And when you do, use the hashtag Patchwork. I really appreciate it. In the words of Evan Boland's beautiful poem called Patchwork, only when it's laid right across the floor, sphere on square and seam on seam, in a good light, a night sky spread, will it start to hit me. These are not bits, they are pieces, and the pieces fit. Thank you again for spending some time with us today. Until next time, peace be with you.